All right, recording the session again. Um, so I've been lots of places that had healthy technical teams with lots of web services, lots of canonical data defined by each group. Um, Constant use of web service, very much a microservice organization, but getting to data governance and getting to organizational plans and strategies around data and web service governance hasn't been something that anybody is good at. There's a lot of duplication of microservices. There's a lot of fracturing in the microservice philosophy wherever anybody's done it, and some people just not completely not understanding um, how to build a microservice and or how or when to implement middleware service bus. MuleSoft does attempt to answer that question from a few levels. So the basics of web services, I'll go back and make sure I didn't miss anything on that other slide. And okay, it's really good that an API is defined. An API is an interface that allows you to build on the data and functionality of another application, while a web service is a network-based resource that fulfills a task. Yes, there's an overlap between the two. All web services are APIs, and not all APIs are web services. So that's important to understand. And again, we're getting granular into the in-between space between platforms. So we all work with mostly within the platform of Salesforce. When we cross those boundaries and try to connect to another data service, we have different ways that we're required to connect to them. If we are doing remote SQL calls, if we are doing web service calls, those are all interacting and understanding the APIs of foreign systems. And what a good middleware platform tries to do is homogenize those, make those unique connections, and then allow you a simple set of ways to communicate with those. MuleSoft does that, and it does more than that. There's integration management, API management, web services, and data manipulation. There is an actual whole ETL component inside of MuleSoft for taking data that's in one form and migrating it to another. And there's even, hopefully you guys have all have touched or broached the topic of ETL and when you have to pull data out of two different systems and combine it and throw it into an object or into another shape inside of another system. But a web service tool does not usually do that. Usually you get the data and you have to massage the data. Well, with MuleSoft, you can have the data broker manage all of the rearranging and reshaping of data so that you don't have to do it in your code. So again, with the basics of web services, if we're talking my application, that for all intents and purposes is Salesforce makes a web service call at future method calling out to a web service on another application that may or may not have a user-facing www website. A web service and a website are really the same thing. They are a response to a network request. www usually includes graphical interfaces, navigation, but it's all data that's being passed to the browser. A web service is just data. It doesn't have it doesn't usually contain any graphical information. It is just the data that normally would be housed inside of a table or on a page in that website. So you're calling effectively a web page from that other application. And sorry, hopefully most everybody knows what web services is, but I'm starting with the native concepts just to talk where they divide. There's some granularity that I wasn't expecting, and I've been doing web service and internet working since modem days. So hopefully this helps everybody. So yeah, web pages are data plus visual, a web service, just data. So web service creation and management. The web service layer has to be managed in a certain aspect. There is, if you're creating a web service and you know that Salesforce has all kinds of governor limits around how many times you can call out, how many SOQL queries you can run inside of a loop. Well, consuming web services, I've seen a lot of projects die horrible deaths because they counted on being very chatty with a remote system that was expecting a once a day um, level of data. Give me the whole database, give me the whole table of all users, and give it to me every 5 minutes or when I ask for it. That level of compute required for the source system has to be part of your application's pitch. You know, you can't just do the Salesforce scale. You have to have an architectural view of what your cost is going to be for the downstream systems or your data providers, like web services. So you have to start and be able to readily count that. Now, if you're dealing with an older system like a mainframe that somebody has hacked to provide a web service, older versions of Oracle, other ERP systems, they will not have management layers that keep you from crushing their system with your request. So if you've got new developers that just make calls every few milliseconds or on demand to a web service without caching the data, you can bring down your remote, your third party or your master data systems if you're not paying attention. So those are the things you need to be asking as solution architects. If you're connecting to external data, that needs to be part of your solution request. And if you design something that's really easy, just as long as the data service, the web service performs exactly like you want it to, that's great, unless the remote service can't perform that. Other questions like formats, am I doing REST? Am I doing SOAP? Is this system only provide CSV? Is it tab delimited? Does it only provide files? I worked with middleware providers that were only implemented as SFTP transmission tools, which means that they just pushed files around. And Salesforce doesn't consume data files. You need to have something that picks up the data file, turns it into web service calls, and pushes it by web service to Salesforce, or makes it available as a web service for Salesforce to come and pick up. I had a project sit for 3 months because a group hadn't expected that, and there was no translation layer. Had to go out, buy a completely different tool. I think it was Xplenty is one that can pick up and transform data and move it around. So that is one of the places that MuleSoft plays in. So MuleSoft puts that in front of the other application. It becomes the API layer, and it starts managing the scale, format, any variations. If if a remote caller, remote quester needs it in SOAP, another one needs it in REST, but they're the same canonical data, you can alter the output without changing the canonical, which is the request and the business logic. That if you want to say, what is the value of this product, there needs to be one calculation that calculates cost, not 13, and not one for each different type of web browser that calls and asks for it, or whether it's REST or SOAP. So losing track of those variations can be a huge hole and detriment in your application. So that's one of the things that putting the MuleSoft management layer in front of will help prevent and help manage. Rules on who can get what data, you can put that in there. Your Oracle database, your SQL Server, your CSV file. How do you put authentications on rows inside of a CSV file? How do you make it to where only certain rows can be picked up by certain application requests coming in for that piece of data? That's a component, a layer that you can slap on top of an API. So I think I've already covered that. What method should we expose? How do I authenticate the source? So the web service call, if you have web services exposed, that's great. You can call out to the web service. If you are not able to use a standard API, or if there is not a web service enabled API, MuleSoft contains API connectors for tons of different data sources. So if you're AS400, RS9000, it will translate to the flat file formats that these older systems provide, Informix, so forth, be able to write SQL queries with their specific flavor of SQL and turn that into a web service layer. So there's a bit of a understanding transformation layer that can happen at the API layer, and then also differently be scaled and and then provided as a web service for systems that don't have it. So that your application calls out, grabs those pieces of data. So this is our new minimum unit of integration. You should be thinking about this when you're describing a third-party connection. You shouldn't be looking at a simple call from one place to the other, the simple diagram and dotted line from Salesforce out to third-party application. You should be thinking on what kind of requirements am I going to be putting at the direct API layer and or the web service layer, so that I don't tax or take down the other application and therefore kill my application. So distributed. Now, when we start talking about if you're trying to figure out inventory from a bunch of stores and you want to query every store to find where a certain product is in stock, and this is something that I've done at both JCPenney and 7-Eleven, where it was really fun to put the application together of, I want the Diet Grape Slurpee, and I want one now, and I don't care how far I have to drive to get it. You could go to the website. The website would poll all the stores to see who had that product in stock and come back with your answers and give you a map of where you could go to get your Diet Grapes Slurpee fix, or that silk scarf that your wife wanted. So those become really important. There's being able to do distributed web service management and see all providers of a web service as a single one and put groups and calculations around, like round robin. Give me the first one that responds is the one I want, because I'm looking for somebody who has it in stock, and I'm going to ship it. So I'm just going to pull every store in a certain order until I get a yes, and then I'm going to tell that store to ship it to my customer and say that I have it in stock and I can get it to you tomorrow. Or you can hit them all at the same time if you're looking for simultaneous results. Yeah, here, these 30 stores have it in stock. Go to any one of them and you can have it today. That is what that management of the web service, the API, and the distribution of web service is really where MuleSoft stands alone. The rest of web service management has been done fairly well before, but being able to map and group different web service providers and compile logic on the way they are going to be talked to is kind of, this is the first time I've seen anybody do it, and do it in a graphical way that could make sense, where you weren't reading obnoxious amounts of files and basically running a different program to try and do that. So it's not just load balancing, but it's really information gathering patterns. That's the definition of an application as far as MuleSoft is. How do I get the data? Where do I get it from? How many times am I allowed to ask for it? What method am I bringing it back to? And then there's other functionality built on top of that. Another piece, so once you have that power and be able to pull all that data sources together, the applications that you can write with that become really self-evident. If I can find any product in our company, no matter what store it's in, well, I have a whole bunch of new capabilities that I can write applications. That wasn't a thing before. Before that happened, we just had to think in what's in the warehouse, and I couldn't think about the stores because I could never find all the data in all the stores at any given time. But now that you have all of that together in a single canonical place, in a library of, I have a function, I have a web service that returns a single source data truth from all of the possible sources of data, then you've got a massive business enabling, intelligence driving opportunity. So that's the next layer up. So managing all those connections is one thing. Assembling those into a capability is another thing. And then the next piece of it is bringing that data together and surfacing it in their exchange. The exchange is a public plus private. Your data is in your private exchange. Public data is available for you to go out and get if you choose to do so. But you can make the union of both of these available to your internal users. So a business user could come in and see, wait, I didn't know we had the ability to print to any store, and I didn't know we had the ability to do an inventory search. You mean I could just send training manuals out to every store with one web server? I could write an app for that would just upload that file directly to a store and have it printed out and waiting for them Monday morning. That wasn't possible before. You had to mail that to everybody. You had to email it to people, and they all had to print it out. Now that you've got an API layer in front of the print queue for every single store, especially for every single store, and you know what type it is that has jewelry in it or has an attached Laredo taco in it, you can send the Laredo taco information via print to store with inventory search telling you which stores have the Laredo taco stand built into the 7-Eleven store. So those ideas surfaced up will give your business users, hey, I can combine these two and I can make a new application and do more powerful things because you've gathered these things together and pulled them into data. New employees can come in and see what data is available to be worked on and have different ideas, as opposed to trying to get to know each and every programmer in each and every department on each and every platform to see what they've got mapped, what they don't, and where the holes in their data platforms are and what they don't provide. So that's their exchange. So you hear them talking about it, and then companies, if you're a weather broker, if you're NOAA, if you're Google, if you're doing anything where you're mapping demographics, you can provide that data there, and I can do an inventory search for everywhere where it's currently raining, and I can send them a please hang a coupon for umbrellas in your store based on the fact that I know with inventory search you have them, and the ERP system that I know your zip code, and I combine that with the weather. I can tell it's raining where you're at, and I can have a dynamic weather-based application sending you per storm cloud recommendations for what to do in your store. So it gets really powerful when you start combining it with all this public data and your private data, or any data that you buy, like marketing, SEO, and so forth. All right, so this is their diagram. This is kind of their version of this that I was talking about, where hopefully you can see from the components we were looking at that each data source that's over here, each application, whether it's a database or a web app, has this API layer to talk to its data or its information directly, and or provide it as a web service so that any modern application could call and get the data. This is the diagram that they provide that kind of talks about that. MuleSoft, they put that at the experience level, at the process level. You can have some parts that are doing, business logic holding, some that are just are user-facing or device-facing filtering layers, and some that API or web service direct layers that are connecting directly to your source systems, and put different types of governance and business logic in them, but also present them on an exchange so that all of your business users can come in and see the data from a visual and human readable perspective. Oh, that's good eggnog. So this is what their public API index looks like. You can see whether it's reference, whether they have different categories, what type of data it's currently provided in. It could be in more than one. You see there's multiple ones that do geographical work, weather, and so forth. Those are constantly updated, and are free. They're basically as public service. Some of them are pay, and those are listed elsewhere. This is their internal connectors and data marketplace. So this is where you can go in and find, here is the Mule 4 data connector. Here is a Kafka consumption data connector. If you're picking up data from the open source PubSub tool Kafka, which is gaining a lot of popularity as a way to put things out, write once, consume infinite. It is the data source for many mobile applications that you don't want, every user to be connecting directly to your Oracle database. The biggest and best bang for your CPU buck is to put it in a PubSub model, and Kafka is the biggest, and because it's open source, one of the most popular tools and patterns that people are using. So MuleSoft can connect directly to that and expose data that's inside of Kafka as a web service out to other people or to other applications inside. So same thing with Salesforce Einstein Analytics, Workday, FTPS, SFTP, OAuth, banking. So pretty much if there's a system out there and it's got more than 3 users on it, they probably have a connector for it. You can pull in your SharePoint data. Anytime somebody uploads a file to SharePoint, put it on the public website, but turn it into a PDF first. So it's kind of the sky's the limit, but these are all out there to kind of consume your data and transform it however you like or need it to be there. The one thing that I probably don't like about their API design tool, now they have a graphic version. They have a kind of a Flow developer version of the tool, but when you need to start working in it and typing data, a lot of times you'll have to get into their RAML development language, and I'm gonna forget what RAML stands for. But anyway, it is tab delimited. It is space delimited. It's if you get the number of spaces in front of query parameters wrong, it moves it up in its understanding. So it doesn't respect positioning. It's not like XML, which has absolute positioning and nesting based on what elements you're in. You have to pay way too much attention to your indentation and tabbing. It will tell you sometimes, but you can accidentally copy and paste something with an extra space and really end up in a needle in a haystack chase based on trying to manage data that way. Now, their API, their IDE is actually fairly intuitive. So this is how you would build that up, and you can kind of see. Unfortunately, it's still Eclipse. I cannot stand Eclipse. Once you get the hang of this, and there is some learning curve on being able to drag elements from over here onto the stage and then go in and configure them one at a time. And then if you have to go into the RAML, you can. It's good. It's not great if you're used to doing declarative programming with Salesforce. It is a lot more of digging into the code and having to pay developer level respect to stuff like indentation and syntax. So some, and I think more and more, can be done just with the WYSIWYG through the GUI, but there is still some that has to be done. This down here, and I think I may have skipped the section on, nope, it's there. So DataWeave. DataWeave, I believe, is an open source, it's not a platform, it's kind of a processing language. It's kind of like JSON, it's a standard on doing data transformation. If you are picking up, if you've connected to a web service and it is providing you, the WSDL tells you that these are the 15 elements that it returns, and it's returning it in an XML payload, and you need to provide them or input them into Salesforce or something else in a different structure. The drag and drop, and it really is drag and drop between, I'm inside this structure called plain, and or inside this payload, and I have a code, and I just drag the connector to whenever I go do a web service call, the output from flight code gets stored inside of my variable code, and then my application can present that, transmit that, transform that as desired. You can, when you go into this, and I'll show some of that, this payload map is what's generated here, but you can go in and say if name and payload name if payload name wasn't exactly what I needed to come into name and I actually needed to concatenate first name and last name, here's where I would write the data weave expression to concatenate two fields together. I love doing ETL, transforming data. The stuff that it does out of the box is really good. I don't think it's quite on the level of Informatica and SSRS or SSIS and DTS for being able to do kind of WYSIWYG stuff, but the language power beats its ease of use. So, and plus it's open. So if you learn data weave, you're not really, it's not a throwaway skill. It's like learning SQL, that it should be something that's, it's a data transform syntax that's used in other systems. I haven't seen it in any others yet, but the fact that they're leaning into an open standard makes me very happy. So, you know, this looks pretty complicated, can be. This is your kind of minimum. This is what a standard get data from someplace else, transform it, and have it in the, and be able to let Salesforce call in, hey, I'd like to know what the current flights are. I don't have to worry about the web service from American Airlines being in tab delimited format in a CSV. MuleSoft takes it, transforms it, and presents it to me as a standard REST web service, and Salesforce doesn't have to do any of that work. If tomorrow I want to add something else to that, like United, it's a completely different format. It can be made to look exactly the same as what you were getting from American Airlines, and you manage the translation inside of the connectivity application. Your API management framework takes care of all that, and then your Salesforce developers just call a web service and they get exactly the data that they expect back. So some of the concepts around what a Mule event is and a Mule application took a little while. I think I have sprinkled those through this here. So an application can consist of a single flow, multiple flows connected together. You can pretty much combine any level of logic or any level of connections into a single Mule application. Call it an application in management, or you can make fragments. Hey, I just want the API connector. Anybody who's going to use that, I want them to have this logic when they ask for cost. And I'm going to put that logic out there, and it's going to be its own Lambda, basically. You consume it. I don't care if you transform it to REST, SOAP, whatever, but the business logic of what cost is out there as a fragment for everybody to pick up and reuse. And if cost changes because of tax calculation or rounding, I go change that source, everybody picks that up. So you can get really granular with your data management and definition there, and provide that as a service that keeps your developers from having to understand every single piece of your business and the logic and just consume the thing that says cost. And if cost is wrong, somebody has to go fix cost. It's not your application. So Mule is technically, it's the runtime engine of the Anypoint platform. It's a containerized framework, just like we were talking earlier about Salesforce being something you put on a container and run inside of your own web environment, on your own metal. The Mule runtime that requests go to are configured and run out is headless. It can be installed. There's actually a really lightweight one that you could run headless on top of an application. We had some really old stuff running inside of 7-Eleven at 1990 level technologies, computers that didn't have video cards on them. USB was an upgrade we couldn't afford to do. So we talked about putting this Java interpreter, this Mule runtime, on there so it could listen directly to the computer, and whenever a certain DLL was called or a text file was written to the operating system, that it would pick that up and transmit that data up or have that data ready to present as a web service. But you could get all the way down to where the Mule can run, I think, almost on like a Raspberry Pi or IoT device, and listen to line level communication and send that up and make that component, that doorbell, that check oil light, anything, be a web service provider and a data provider. So it gets down to that granular level. You can deploy that just about everywhere, and then it feeds up into this Anypoint platform system. You decouple point to point, which is one of the keys of web services. It's always good to know the right time when to do that. You really need to have to be on a certain tipping point before working with middleware becomes extra work. If you've got 3 web service calls to one data source or to 10, you might not see a whole lot of lift from having a piece of middleware. If you've got 30, if you've got 300 consumers trying to hit the same old Oracle database, you might want to put something in there that provides a caching level and does the transform, and that you're not taxing it with really complicated SQL. And you can set, I didn't go over this on the core, but the last one, you can go in and set rules. This application can only call this web service 4 times a day. If it calls it more than that, something's going wrong, or the vendor built something wrong. So you can hold a vendor to a design standard of this better only synchronize data 1 time of day, and then you have to trust them. And if they point multiple but it only accept requests from the production server. If they try and use dev systems and those connect to the production server, you can go in and map those and set those authorization rules. So if you're an architect and you are trying to manage a bunch of resources and performance is a consideration, this is a surfacing level visibility and management layer that can make your job easier. Or at least it can make your systems perform. It won't be easier, it's more to manage, but you can also not take down the source systems by having those extra controls. That is all the slides I have. That's all the information. Anybody have any questions? I think everybody can still talk. Make sure, I think I did a mute all. Jitendra, did I get anything massively wrong, or was I disconnected like 30 minutes ago and I've been talking to myself?
No, Paul, I think you did an excellent job. All the basics and everything covered pretty well. So one thing in the spring 21, MuleSoft bought that cloud designer in Salesforce directly. So you don't need Eclipse, you don't need to go to the MuleSoft. If you have a license, directly drag and drop and build your API right inside from Salesforce.
Cloud Designer does 80% of the stuff that you can do in Eclipse still. As of my training that happened a month ago, they said that there's still some stuff that you can't do in the Cloud Designer. I don't mean to argue with you. I definitely say that
No.
But
yeah. So for an example, yeah, you are writing your Java libraries, or you're writing some Java code, because MuleSoft does give that capability of writing a plugins. That is the moment you would need Eclipse, definitely. But let's say you have a different APIs already available, just do some transformation and everything. Cloud Designer should be able to work.
Yeah, understanding this now, so I was trying to learn all of the granularity of these different components, and take apart web services and the difference between APIs and web services and service buses, and where those different functions happen. I was trying to learn those at the same time as learning the Eclipse IDE interface, and it is heavy. It's not as easy, and I don't think VS Code is very easy, but it's definitely not as easy as a Flow developer or the Dev Console. It's clunky, but yeah, more and more stuff is getting better every day. I can see them investing in the Cloud Designer a lot, and I hope, it feels like they're planning to be off of that soon. I don't know how soon. I don't want to guess or say that I've heard anything, but they are reluctant to tell people to use Eclipse and want people to use the Cloud Designer for everything.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for sharing, with this MuleSoft, because it does a lot more than what I was thinking it could do. I was thinking of similar things such as the ScribeSoft. It's just an ETL data popper, but this is interesting. The amount of things you can do.
Yeah, I got frustrated with the MuleSoft guys when I kept trying to ambush them at different conferences. They have a local meeting here. I think they're starting to create a user group. There may be one starting up in Dallas, but they've had local conferences, and I hit them at Dreamforce, and I kept asking them, I was like, okay, does this replace Informatica? Well, you can do ETL. Oh, okay, but how many records per second can it do? Well, it depends on the nodes. Okay, so there's there's a lot of gating, very much similar to Salesforce, where there are dials and licensing that you have to go through. It is not, that steam engine that you expect to just put to the side and add fire to it and give it power. You do have to kind of know the shape of the stuff you get in there. It's not something like Kafka where you just, you set up a minimal CPU thing for Kafka and it can handle, umpteen thousand requests per second because it is built in streamlined. There's definitely, it's not the super robust out of the box. It is not supposed to be your CDN. It's not set to handle that space. There's still stuff you have to put in front of it, but seeing the data orchestration and the app and canonical orchestration, that I get. And being able to do performance tuning, basically stop letting this application talk so rapidly. Why would people be hitting refresh on this page so often? I'm going to cache this. I'm going to refuse to give them, inventory that hasn't been updated in the last 4 seconds. Or maybe I can cache it offline and not have to hit the source system, therefore slowing down the store that's trying to sell Slurpees by somebody hitting refresh too many times trying to find out if they can get Slurpees, or they have a run on Slurpees one day. So yeah, hopefully so when you're enabling it, those are the pieces, those are the components that you want to ask. Those are all the considerations that a developer working with MuleSoft might have to be aware of. So I didn't really want it to be a training on how to use MuleSoft, but if you encounter it, or if you know it's available, you at least know what you can go ask the MuleSoft person to go do. Hey, set this up, enable it for my person, and make sure that the web service does REST, because I am not writing yet another SOAP translation layer in Apex again. You can do that with a couple clicks. It would take me 3 months of testing, and it would put a huge load on the complexity of the Salesforce app. So it's just where the power is, what it can do, its capabilities, and what you might get out of it as a developer. So, Moyez, have you had a chance to implement it yet?
Yeah, Paul. So I implemented MuleSoft in my previous project for AT&T. What we found is ESB is extremely easy to use. So you go on Anypoint Studio, either in Eclipse or the Cloud Designer, converting your API to the REST versus SOAP is just a one step, drag and drop. All those capabilities are there. As usual, Salesforce team account executives did ask to use it as an ETL, where we have to load like millions of record, and our system had around 16 GB of RAM, and it was extremely slow. So if you want to run MuleSoft as an ETL, make sure that the node, either it's a local or the cloud, has enough juice there. Eventually, we didn't have a fund. We used it as an ESB, and for initial data load, we wrote some shell script. We created a CSV file, and then we used a data loader to load the data.
Okay, cool. That's exactly what I kind of took away just inferred from the class. So I'm by far an expert. I would validate, if anything here sounds really interesting, I'd validate it with Jitendra as opposed to just taking my word on it. I'm just an old school integrator, and this is how it seemed to me, and what I got from the training and the development and the information I've been gathering, trying to figure out where to put it in my backpack of tools. So thank you. Moyez, have you used it?
Yeah, like Jitendra, we are implementing it at different business units at AT&T. Couple of things there. Um, Absolutely, you need a number of processors in order to get any sort of performance gains. Um, at AT&T, the good thing is that their licensing allows them to get those processors reasonably cheap. That's a recent development. But for you and me, if we were asking for a pricing on that, it's quite pricey. I think it runs into the many tens of thousands of dollars per processor, and that sometimes can be the thing that throws the technology off the rails.
Mhm.
And so what we've done is we've asked ourselves, is this just an ETL application? And if it is, then generally that opens up many more technologies. But the complexity of things that we can do, both from a standpoint of enterprise integrations, right? The sheer number and complexity of integrations, as well as the deep security that we can enforce kind of holistically, makes this a great tool at the enterprise level if you can get past the costing of the product.
Yeah, at 7-Eleven, a 100-year-old company with multiple development streams and every platform imaginable, this would have been a massive success,
Right.
because it would help organize those, and you don't have the tolerance for it.
Yeah.
And every project that came in did not understand. Every vendor that came in said, "Yeah, we'll just come in and we'll connect to your user store and to your product store." Um, and we'll provide a mobile application for you that does XYZ. And we're like, great. You know what we're using for that, right? Oh, yeah, your guy told us. Well, that's 3 VPNs to get through. That's negotiating with a third party vendor to get access to test data. Those gateways, the gates that you have to get through in order to get to that data can be an extremely limiting or costly from a
Right.
consulting perspective component of an engagement. And if you're able to say, yeah, you'll need to have a separate project. We're happy to do it for you, but we want to isolate our success on your crazy background into an integration project. And our development team
Right.
will work off of POC data that we load into MuleSoft and call. And so when your data provider team gets done, we don't have to wait and start when they get done. They provide the data. If they're not able to provide it all, then it's a challenge to the integration layer and at the bus layer. And so you can kind of
Cool.
offload that part of the project now to something else and kind of put it in yeah, nobody's going to be paying attention to the behind the scenes data connectivity project um, and complain because they get to see their shiny web app and then the data gets done when it gets done. So it's to compartmentalize functionality development. I think it's can be a huge benefit to projects, especially Salesforce, which is so dependent on external connectivity based on the way
Right.
it's licensed and flows.
Right. The other thing that I find challenging when we're bidding these projects is that there's always plenty of money for marketing. If the budget you're trying to live off of is the chief marketing officer or somebody in sales, or if you're going up that channel to get your budget at the enterprise level, that money is available. Unfortunately, MuleSoft is strictly a technical tool, right? Usually there has to be a frustration level inside the IT department before they'll come and say, "Hey, we have the 3 VPN problem that you just talked about," and marketing says, "Not my problem. What's the shiny thing that you give me
Yep.
that would make me spend my budget?" And so where you get the funding from is sometimes a challenge to MuleSoft. MuleSoft projects. But if you can get them there, if you can convince the enterprise level VP, sorry, the enterprise VP at the C-suite level, that this, even though there's nothing shiny that we're delivering, there's no new functionality, what it's doing for us is it's letting us wrangle our disparate data sources in a way that'll let you scale. And the story that I usually end up telling is, where is your data going to be 5 years from now? Not even 10 years from now, but 5 years from now. Is it going to be the same size? Is it going to be twice as big? Is it going to be 10 times as big? And are you prepared to not just wrangle that data, but you have your hands around it in a way that you can bring in an AI tool at some point to analyze it. And if the answer is, if they're nodding vigorously, now you can tell the story that, well, you need a tool that can wrangle the data together, and that is MuleSoft, right? That you have to go there as an enterprise, but it's a difficult story to sell, and so we're finding fewer MuleSoft projects than I think enterprises deserve. That's just our kind of view of the landscape. I don't know if anybody else has
SensCorp has been doing a few, and thus there was some incentive for me to go learn it, and they're popping up more and more. This right here, this service catalog, to me, that's something that you take to the CIO. Business is so unbelievably handcuffed and either empowered or restrained by data right now in modern applications and modern marketing, that if you can offer somebody, here's what, they don't care what systems you have. They don't care if you have SharePoint. They don't care if you're in Amazon. They care what data you can give them so that they can do their job, sell their product, inform their customers. And if you can start delivering that intranet of data or data stores that they can weave stories and business functionality together, I think that's the thing. So hopefully the more modern, marketing director, product director, sales and operations directors and VPs know the value of mature data and can push this to IT. It's like, yeah, I know we just bought X system, but until its data is in the catalog and can be consumed by any of the 30 application platforms that we have, it's not done. So make sure you blend maturity level, maturing up to being in our master data management platform as part of every project that creates any kind of data. Data governance is hard to get landed in a lot of companies that aren't making a ton of money off of data, but that is what it is as always. All right, well, that's everything. If nobody else has any questions, let me see if I can promote everyone to panelist. Actually, you should be able to. Tell me if you can enable video. Who's got a sweater on that wants to show it off? So Moyaz is now heavily in the lead. Anybody else type or talk? Everybody should be able to.
No sweater.
Oh, come on, Nathan.
I have
I
Sorry,
thought
go
I
ahead.
had one, but it was a kid small, so it's not going to work.
Well, we'll hold it up and we'll see if we can give it a few points.
Let me go find it. Hold on.
Paul,
I
have
have
you
a Christmas
priced?
jacket. I don't know if that qualifies.
You have
Say
what?
again?
I have a Christmas jacket. It's a red and green jacket.
All right, are you able to turn on video?
I don't know. I don't get that option.
Okay. Let me promote to panelist. All right, you should be able to do it now.
Oh, I like that.
That's cool.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see.
Paul, you're not going to compete?
My competition is my scarf. That's it. I don't own
Okay.
a sweater either. My scarf and my toque. And nobody answered my quiz question. Moyez, I
Are you
think
going
you.
to tell us what the scarf is?
What's that?
Are you going to tell us what that is, the scarf?
Yeah. So this is a Doctor Who scarf, the original Tom Baker sci-fi Doctor Who. So iconic for super nerds like me.
You know you're still recording, right, Paul? Remember when you started it for the MuleSoft?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and cut it off. It's fine.
Then I can show you my shirt.